Ira. It's been a long and interesting year. Many of us have gone on journeys of discovery. Many of us have acknowledged some hard truths. Today, though, we want to celebrate freedom. Freedom for an entire part of the U.S. population, granted by the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and finally acknowledged fully on the 19th of June, 1865. IRA has a commitment to inclusion and equality. We hope you'll take advantage of our Juneteenth offer. You can find more information about it in our app under Apply a Free Offer. But today is not about us. It's about acknowledging the struggle and celebrating the numerous contributions of Black Americans. Music featured in this special comes primarily from www.yourclassical.org. Check out their Juneteenth playlist of Black classical composers. This piece is from the movie Black Klansman, score by Terence Blanchard. Where we've been. This year, we explored museums focusing on the Black experience. Here are some clips. The African American Museum of Iowa on the Middle Passage.
This section we're in now is actually going to give us some ideas of what the Middle Passage was like. Let's see what the layout of the ship was like, just to give me some context. I'm sure my imagination isn't anywhere near what it must look like.
It says here they have a diagram of the plan of the British slave ship Brooks from 1789, and it says stowage of the British slave ship Brooks under the regulated slave trade. The first is a diagram of the ship from the side, which shows that there are two decks below the top deck that were used for storage of their human cargo, and they then go on to show diagrams of the way these decks were laid out. The first says, plan of lower deck with the stowage of 292 slaves, 130 of these being stowed under the shelves, as shown in figure D and figure 5. So this is a lot, but they have a layout here of one of these decks, and you can see the diagram of human figures laid out in rows, really, going from the outside walls of the ship towards the center, 2 rows of people laid just shoulder to shoulder, long ways with their feet against the wall and heads pointing towards the center. And then another row of, it looks like 3 or 4 people between those 2 heads as like the 4 rows meet in the center. And it looks like they just packed these humans in as tightly as they could, any way they could make them fit. It says that there were shelves above that level where they would then lay more people. And so 130 of them, of 292, were underneath these shelves. And in this exhibit, there's a 3D representation of that sort of stacking method. And it shows one man laying down on a wooden surface, and then it looks like 2 or 3 feet above him, where he's laying, is another shelf. And then there are 2 figures lying on top of that shelf, head to toe, side by side. And so they would just do that for rows and rows.
Well, for context, when they departed the west coast of Africa, does it say anywhere how long it took them to get here? Sadly, people died and clearly some survived. So,
an average transatlantic journey of the early 16th century lasted several months, but by the 19th century, the crossing often required fewer than 6 weeks. So it sounds like at least a month from the very beginning of the slave trade, more like several months in that condition. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship being so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspirations so that the air soon became unfit for respiration from a variety of loathsome smells and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died.
National Museum of African American History and Culture on Muhammad Ali.
And then at the bottom of this page is a quote from Muhammad Ali. It says, "That was my purpose, and I'm showing the world that you can be here and still free and stay yourself and get respect from the world."
Boy, that's a fitting quote for the times.
So this photograph is, you can see Muhammad Ali, who I guess was still Cassius Clay at the time in 1964, sitting at a counter. It looks like a diner counter. And he has another African-American man in glasses sitting beside him smiling, and a crowd of men around him, and they're all wearing suits. And Ali himself is wearing a black suit with a black bow tie and sitting at the counter smiling at Malcolm X, who's standing behind the counter with a camera up to his face, photographing Muhammad Ali.
Buffalo Soldier Museum.
African Americans have served proudly in every great American war. In 1866, through an act of Congress, legislation was adopted to create 6 all-African American Army units. The units were identified as the 9th and 10th Cavalry, and the 38th, 39th, 40th, and 41st Infantry Regiments. The 4 infantry regiments were later recognized to form the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments. These fighting men represented the first Black professional soldiers in a peacetime army. The recruits came from varied backgrounds, including former slaves and veterans from service in the Civil War. And the next section is called Origins of the Nickname. African Americans have fought in military conflicts since colonial days. However, the Buffalo Soldiers, comprised of former slaves, freemen, and Black Civil War soldiers, were the first to serve during peacetime. Once the westward movement had begun, prominent among those blazing treacherous trails of the Wild West were the Buffalo Soldiers of the U.S. Army. These African Americans were charged with and responsible for escorting settlers, cattle herds, and railroad crews.
Tuskegee Airmen Museum, all about the P-51 Mustang Redtail.
They were in operation between 1941 and 1946, I believe. And in that time, they taught over 1,500 airmen, and there were many, many more people who were staff, ground crew, instructors, cooks, maintenance, everything you'd want. The very first thing that strikes everyone is there is a life-size replica of a P-51 Mustang fighter jet. They were devastating fighters. This is called Becoming the Red Tails, is the legend in red script. Now, the fun part about this is that on that cloudscape, there are 2 planes painted. There is a German Messerschmitt fighter, and pursuing it is one of the Red Tails, about to give that plane a very hard time. Now, there is a single quote on a placard on that sky blue backdrop with showing a bit of a dogfight there. And this says, the quote says, "This is your opportunity. You will stay with those bombers." And that was a quote from Lieutenant Colonel Davis, who was the leader of that fighter group.
National Civil Rights Center, the Auburn section of Atlanta.
Despite the oppressive nature of life under Jim Crow laws, Atlanta's African American population managed to build vibrant communities. The city's Auburn Avenue district was a hub of black commerce, religion, and entertainment.
Auburn and
the
beyond.
Institutions of the Atlanta University Center provided
what looks to be a sky view of that area of Auburn and the city's actual building specs. And in front of that screen of the actual Auburn area, we have what looks to be images with small stories of people that were important to that section and that time.
Then, in 2008, America elected its first African American president, Barack Obama. Our agents are the heart of IRA. Here are some thoughts from them about Juneteenth.
Hello, and happy Juneteenth! My name is Shannon Gibson, and I am an IRA agent. Today I would love to share with you what Juneteenth means, not only to me, but to my family as well. We fully believe that Juneteenth is a day of profound celebration in recognition of the due justice, equality, and most of all freedom owed to the countless lives that were affected by the unfortunate history behind this day. On June 19th, we always make time to gather to discuss the indisputable impact of the events in our country's past and how this holiday serves not only as a day of remembering and honoring all of our ancestors, family members, and friends that suffered in slavery prior to this day in 1865, but also as a day of celebrating their undeniable right to independence. Furthermore, we wholeheartedly feel that it is instrumental to commemorate the myriad of achievements and accomplishments of African Americans in the communities that they deeply enrich. My hope is that we all stand together, united in spirit, as you enjoy your Juneteenth celebrations wherever you may be. Thank you for taking the time to listen and share in observing this important holiday.
So Juneteenth for me is about, acknowledging American history that unfortunately is often left out of our education system. I'm thrilled, recently that there's been an increase in people taking part in these conversations centered around healing from the trauma that Black people have endured, both in the past and in the present here in the U.S. It's important for us to understand that Black American history is American history and should be studied and celebrated by everyone here. So this year I plan on doing my part to educate myself on a piece of ancestral history, that I'm not so much aware of. And of course, I'm going to be hanging out with friends and loved ones and just enjoying each other's company and celebrating the fact that we're even able to know each other and love on each other the way that we do. So ultimately, Juneteenth is really for acknowledging our trauma while celebrating our victories and vowing to continue the pursuit of social, economic, and systemic equality. So happy Juneteenth, everyone. I hope everybody finds a great way to celebrate this year and every year on out.
In my family, we celebrate Juneteenth by eating corn on the cob and chicken. We do this because it is the meal that my grandmother's grandmother had when she found out that she was no longer a slave, and so we continue to do that as just a way to pay homage and to remember all of the sacrifices that previous generations did for us. We think of Juneteenth as a way to signify the end of slavery, and not just the one in Texas, but there were a lot of miniature celebrations throughout the Emancipation Proclamation being passed, and so we just celebrate all of those events on June 19th. We like to discuss our past and where we came from so that it keeps us humble. In our family, we've taken a couple different trips to the plantations where our previous generations were enslaved, and it just is a really stark reality and reminder of not that long and not that distant of a history for us. So what Juneteenth means to us now is that we are free from the chains, but we're not entirely free. We celebrate Juneteenth as a way to remember what happened and to know that we still have a long way to go, because while no one is in chains, there is still the Jim Crow law, and it's still a really difficult world for minorities to be in. But we also know that if we can continue keeping Juneteenth relevant, and if we can continue to acknowledge the past, we can learn from it and we can do better in the future.
Hi, my name is Chriselle Jackson, and I'm Asian from Raleigh, North Carolina. I just wanted to share some candid thoughts on Juneteenth. And, this past weekend, I actually visited a plantation, Boone Hall Plantation in Charleston, South Carolina. That area is pretty well known to be one of the wealthiest areas during the beginnings of slavery because of the rice plantations. And, rice back then per pound was worth its weight in gold. That's how important it was. That's how valuable it was. And to know that, as an African American woman, that I'm a descendant of people who worked, who survived, who thrived, who learned how to adapt, and who was responsible for the wealth of this country. It is deeply humbling. While I was in that space, I thought about what I was going to say. I wanted to soak up everything. It was just such a deeply humbling experience. And it brought even more meaning to Juneteenth for me. To know that I come from a people that were stripped of their culture, who were forcibly removed from their land, and still made it, and still survived by any means necessary, who were so resourceful because they had no choice. And to know that it ultimately ended in the emancipation, the freedom of that same people. It just speaks volumes to, the ability to survive, the meaning of adaptation, the meaning of life. Life always finds a way. And I'm just deeply humbled when I think about Juneteenth, and I think about, the freedom of a people who built this country. And, I think it's important for everyone to educate themselves on, the contributions of African Americans to this country. What it means to be free. To remember, what slavery did. History has a tendency to repeat itself, but when you look back and when you learn from history, when you learn where you come from, you can make adjustments. And, moving forward, I just, encourage everyone to become more familiar to celebrate that freedom, to celebrate that birthright that everyone as human beings deserves. And I just want to say happy Juneteenth.
We rose. From Africa's heart, we rose. Already a people, our faces ebon, our bodies lean, we rose. Skills of art, life, beauty, and family, crushed by forces we knew nothing of, we rose. Survive we must. We did. We rose. We rose to be you. We rose to be me. Above everything expected, we rose to become the knowledge we never knew. We rose. Dream, we did. Act, we must. Christina K.
President Biden enters the East Room with Kamala Harris following behind. They walk up to the podium and wave to the crowd, who is standing and waving and clapping. The podium is in front of large golden drapes going from floor to ceiling, with the United States flag and the President of the United States flag alternating behind for a total of 6. Kamala Harris steps up to the podium. Everybody is sitting
Good
down.
afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. So throughout history, Juneteenth has been known by many names.
Kamala Harris.
Jubilee Day, Freedom Day, Liberation Day, Emancipation Day, and today, a national holiday.
She looks around the room smiling. She's wearing a navy blue jacket with gold beaded necklace and a white blouse with the American flag on her lapel.
And looking out across this room, I see the advocates, the activists, the leaders who have been calling for this day for so long, including the one and only Miss Opal Lee.
Looks over to Miss Opal Lee and starts clapping. Camera is panning over to Miss Opal Lee, but you cannot really see because everybody else is standing up. But you can see the top of President Biden's head, who appears to be kneeling down talking to Miss Opal. He stands up wide-eyed and runs back over to the podium.
From the President of the United States. And
Heading to the
I
left
see
of Kamala
members
Harris
of
now.
Congress, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, members of the United States Senate who passed this bill unanimously. And all
Looking around the room, smiling.
All of whom collectively were responsible for delivering this bill to the president's desk. And I thank you all. We thank you all. Your nation thanks you all. And you know, when we establish a national holiday, it makes an important statement. National holidays
Using her hands to emphasize her points.
Important. These are days when we as a nation have decided to stop and take stock, and often to acknowledge our history. And so as we establish Juneteenth as our newest national holiday, let us be clear about what happened on June 19th, 1865, the day we call Juneteenth. Because you see, that day was not the end of slavery in America. Yes, on that day, the enslaved people of Galveston, Texas, learned that they were free. But in fact, 2.5 years earlier, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery in the Confederacy. So think about that. For more than 2 years, the enslaved people of Texas
Starting to tear up a little
were kept
bit.
in servitude. For more than 2 years, they were intentionally kept from their freedom. For more than 2 years. And then on that summer day, 156 years ago, the enslaved people of Texas learned the news. They learned that they were free, and they claimed their freedom. It was indeed an important day.
For claim. Camera is still focused right on Kamala Harris. You cannot see the room.
And still, let us
She's just looking around at everyone clapping.
That day was not the end of slavery in America. It would be 6 more months before the 13th Amendment was ratified, before enslaved people in the South and the North were free. So as we commemorate the history of Juneteenth, as we did just weeks ago with the history of the Tulsa Race Massacre, we must learn from our history, and we must teach our children our history, because it is part of our history as a nation. It is part of American history. So let me end by saying
open
this.
arms.
We are gathered here in a house built by enslaved people. We are footsteps away from where President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. And we are here to witness President Joe Biden establish Juneteenth as a national holiday. We have come far, and we have far to go, but today is a day of celebration. It is not only a day
Big
of
smile.
pride, it is also a day for us to reaffirm and rededicate ourselves to action. And with that, I say, happy Juneteenth, everybody. And with that, I introduce the President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Motion's over to the president. Kamala Harris steps down from the podium as Joe Biden is taking his place in front of the podium. Camera's panning out to the audience, who's all standing and clapping.
Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Everyone is sitting down.
156 years ago, 156 years, June 19th, 1865. John, thanks for being here. Major General of the
panning in on the
Union
president.
Army arrived in Galveston, Texas to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation and free the last enslaved Americans in Texas from bondage. The day, as you all know, and we repeat some of what was said, became known as Juneteenth. You all know that. A day that reflects what the Psalm tells us. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. Juneteenth marks both the long, hard night of slavery and subjugation and a promise
Very somber face.
of a brighter morning to come. This is a day of profound, in my view, profound weight and profound power. A day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. What I've long called America's original sin. At the same time, I also remember the extraordinary capacity to heal and to hope and to emerge from those painful moments in a bitter, bitter
Panning to the crowd.
version of ourselves, but to make a better version of ourselves. And today we consecrate Juneteenth for what it ought to be, what it must be, a national holiday. As the Vice President noted, a holiday that will join the others of our national celebrations, our independence, our laborers who built this nation, our servicemen and women who served and died in its defense, and the first new national holiday since the creation of Martin Luther King holiday nearly 4 decades ago. I'm grateful to the members of Congress here today, in particular to the Congressional Black Caucus, who did so much to make this day possible. I'm especially pleased that we showed the nation that we can come together as Democrats and Republicans to commemorate this day with an overwhelming bipartisan support of the Congress. I hope this is the beginning
Left and right.
of a change in the way we deal with one another. And we're blessed to mark the day in the presence of Miss Opal Lee. As my mother said, God love her.
Looks over to Miss Opal. Smiles. Pulls out a handkerchief and wipes his upper lip.
I had the honor
and his nose.
of meeting her in Nevada more than a year ago. She told me she loved me, and I believed it. I wanted to believe it. Miss Opal, you're
Big
incredible.
smile as he's facing Miss Opal.
Daughter of Texas, grandmother of the movement to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. And Ms. Opal is, you won't believe it, she's 49 years old. Or 94 years old. But you are an incredible woman, Ms. Opal. You really are. As a child growing up in Texas, she and her family would celebrate Juneteenth. And Juneteenth, 1939, when she was 12 years old, a white mob torched her family home.
Points over
But
to Miss
such
Opal,
hate
who is off screen.
never stopped her any more than it stopped the vast majority of you I'm looking at from this podium. Over the course of decades, she's made it her mission to see that this day came. It was almost a singular mission. She's walked for miles and miles, literally and figuratively, to bring attention to Juneteenth, to make this day possible. I ask once again, we all stand and give her a warm welcome to the White House.
Biden looks over at Miss Opal, starts smiling. Miss Opal is still off screen, zoomed in on President Biden. He gives her an air fist bump and mouths, "Thank you."
As they still say in the Senate, and I said for 36 years, if you excuse me for a point of personal privilege, as I was walking down, I regret that my grandchildren aren't here, because this is a really, really, really important moment in our history. By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history and celebrate progress and grapple
Looks into the
with
camera.
the distance we've come, but the distance we have to travel, Jim. You know, I said a few weeks
Back
ago,
to the people in the audience.
marking the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, great nations don't ignore their most painful moments. Great nations don't ignore their most painful moments. They
Leans
don't
on the podium to
ignore
emphasize
those
his
moments
point.
in the past. They embrace them. Great nations don't walk away. We come to terms with the mistakes we made. And in remembering those moments, we begin to heal and grow stronger. The truth is, it's simply not enough just to commemorate Juneteenth. After all, the emancipation of enslaved Black Americans didn't mark the end of America's work to deliver on the promise of equality. It only marked the beginning. To honor the true meaning of Juneteenth, we have to continue toward that promise, because we've not gotten there yet. The Vice President and I and our entire administration and all of you in this room are committed to doing just that. That's why we've launched an aggressive effort to combat racial discrimination in housing. Finally address the cruel fact that a home owned to this day by a Black American family is usually appraised at a low rate for a similar home owned by a white family in a similar area. That's why we committed to increasing Black home ownership, one of the biggest drivers of generational wealth. That's why we're making it possible for more Black entrepreneurs to access capital, because their ideas are good, they lack the capital to get their fair share of federal contracts so they can begin to build wealth. That's why we're working to give each and every child 3 and 4 years of age, not daycare, but school, in a school. That's
Points down at the podium while saying school, looking back and forth.
That's why we're unlocking
To the right of the room.
incredibly creative and innovation of the history of our historical Black colleges and universities, providing them with the resources to invest in research centers and laboratories to help HBCU graduates prepare and compete for good-paying jobs in the industries of the future. Folks, the promise of equality is not going to be fulfilled until we becomes real in our schools and on our main streets and in our neighborhoods. Our healthcare system.
Down at the audience.
And ensuring that
back to the
equity
teleprompter.
is at the heart of our fight against the pandemic. In the water that comes out of our faucets, and the air that we breathe in our communities, in our justice system, so that we can fulfill the promise of America for all people, all of our people. And it's not going to be fulfilled so long as the sacred right to vote remains under attack.
Itches his eyebrow, looking
You
over
see
at the
this
crowd.
assault from restrictive laws, threats of intimidation, voter purges, and more. an assault that offends the very democracy, our very democracy. We can't rest till the promise of equality is fulfilled for every one of us in every corner of this nation. That, to me, is the meaning of Juneteenth. That's what it's about.
Eyes are more
So
narrow.
let's make this very Juneteenth, tomorrow, the first that our nation will celebrate all together as one nation. A Juneteenth of action on many fronts. One of those is vaccinations. Tomorrow, the Vice President will be in Atlanta on a bus tour helping to spread the word, like all of you have been doing, on life-saving vaccines. And across the country this weekend, including here in Washington, people will be canvassing and hosting events in their communities, going door to door, encouraging vaccinations. We've built equity into the heart of the vaccination program from day one, but we still have more work to do to close the racial gap in vaccination rates. The more we can do that, the more we can save lives. Today also marks the 6th anniversary of the tragic deaths at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina. A killer, motivated by hate, intending to start a race war in South Carolina. He joined his victims
Somber,
in
slightly
Bible
angry
study.
face.
Then he took their lives in the house of worship. It's a reminder that our work to root out hate never ends, because hate only hides. It never fully goes away, it hides. And when you breathe oxygen under that rock, it comes out. And that's what we must understand, that Juneteenth represents not only the commemoration of the end of slavery in America more than 150 years ago, but the ongoing work to have to bring true equity and racial justice into American society, which we can do. In short,
Panning to the whole
this day
room.
doesn't just celebrate the past. It calls for action today. I wish all Americans a happy Juneteenth. I'm certainly in a moment, going to sign into law, making it a federal holiday. And I have to say to you, I've only been president for several months, but I think this will go down for me as one of the greatest honors I will have had as president. Not because I did it, you did it. Democrats and Republicans.
Pointing to the audience.
But it's an enormous, enormous honor. Thank you for what you've done. And by the way, typical of most of us in Congress and Senate, I went down the other end of the hall first and thanked your staffs, because I know who does the hard work.
Smirking, looking at the audience.
No, they're
From
down.
the right to the left.
They're at the other end, but I thank them as well. May God bless you all.
Smiling.
May God protect our troops. Thank you. Now,
Pulls his note cards off of the podium. That was behind his speech.
While I sign, Senator Tina Smith, Senator Ed Markey, Senator Raphael Warnock, Senator John Cornyn, Whip John Clyburn, Representative Barbara Lee, Representative Danny Davis, Chair Joyce Beatty, and Sheila Jackson Lee, and Miss Opal.
In front of the podium is a straight line of white single-petal peace lilies. To the left of the podium is a small desk with the presidential seal with one chair. He is sitting down, and all the representatives that he called up are filing in around behind that desk and behind his chair. Members of the audience are taking selfies, have their phones up, taking pictures of the president and the vice president, Miss Opal, and all the other senators and representatives that are behind him. He's starting to sign it. First pen goes to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee. The second pen and his signature he hands to Miss Opal. Miss Opal accidentally drops it. Vice President picks it up, gives it back to her. No problem.
I don't understand how Barack did this.
He did it.
Signs the other pen and gives it to House Majority Whip James Clyburn. Continuing to sign the bills, everybody's taking pictures. Hands the next pen to Raphael Warnock. Grabs the new pen, is continuing his signature.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hands this pen to Senator Ed Markey. The next pen is going to Joyce Beatty, Senator Joyce Beatty. Joe Biden is smirking and smiling.
Thank you.
He looks over to his right and hands the next pen to Senator Tina Smith. The next pen goes to Representative Barbara Lee.
There it is. There's a man.
They're underlined for his signature to give that pen to Senator John Cornyn.
Yeah, okay, man. I'm sorry, man.
Looks over, everyone points out to Representative Danny Davis.
All right.
President Biden gives him the last pen. Everybody is clapping, looking at the camera. Biden is still sitting, clapping his hands. Members of the audience are starting to stand up. President Biden turns the bill he just signed around to face the camera. Everyone in the audience is standing up and taking pictures with the president and everybody that is up behind that makeshift desk.
Election day next. Mr. President,
Corner off screen is trying to get a question answered.
a national holiday?
President Biden is looking at Ms. Opal and having a conversation. He's saying thank you and congratulating everybody that is around her. Other representatives are getting up out of their seats now and just starting to mingle as the ceremony is coming to a close. Biden leans in to talk to Ms. Opal as everybody else is moving and listening in intently around Biden's desk. And the bill has been signed, and everybody now is just congratulating each other.
Lift every voice and sing, earth, heaven, ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies resound the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. March on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, the chastening rod felt in the days when hope unborn has died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our star is cast. God of our weary years, from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk of the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy